So good evening and welcome everyone. Heads Up for Harry and the Hillside Foundation want to welcome everybody here tonight. We appreciate everyone making the time in your life to participate in a conversation about mental health that is always relevant, but especially in the environment we're in today. Our goal tonight is to pick the brain of experts to discuss how to navigate anxiety, stress, and maintain our mental health and coping mechanisms as young adults and parents as we head back to school. First, we will start with brief introductions for our host organizations for this panel. My name is Spencer. I'll be the moderator for this panel. And tonight, I represent Heads Up for Harry. Heads Up for Harry is a nonprofit organization started in 2018, whose mission it is to help young adults address and cope with mental health and mental illness in positive ways. Over the last couple of years, Heads Up for Harry has been hosting panels at local Atlanta schools to share stories about mental health and mental illness, and host Q&A panels with students. Also hosting tonight, we have the Hillside Atlanta Foundation. The Hillside Atlanta Foundation was launched earlier this year and supports Hillside through advocacy and fundraising. Founded in 1888, Hillside is a nonprofit organization that serves over 800 children and adolescents a year. Their expertise is providing clinical treatment to young adults struggling with mental and behavioral health challenges such as anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and bipolarism. Hillside's continuum of care includes therapeutic foster care, in-home intervention, day program treatment, and residential treatment on their 14-acre campus in Midtown. We have some experts from the Hillside Atlanta Foundation tonight that will be joining, but before we bring them in, we want to gain a little bit of perspective from an enrolled student tonight, and we're lucky to have her on. Frances is with us tonight. She is a junior at Marist School. She is involved in track, theater, and is an Active Minds board member this year. Active Minds is a group organization at her school that supports mental health, awareness, and education for students. So Frances, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. So Frances, you're back in school just a week or two now. How has going back to school been? What's new? What's challenging as a high school student this year?
So like with COVID, our school decided that students could choose between virtual and hybrid learning. But my family chose to do virtual school. So it's very different from how it was before term 2 and 1 last year, because obviously I could be on campus. And I really miss my campus, but I think being virtual is probably safer for right now.
For sure, and it's a tough decision for everyone. You're lucky to be able to be virtual, but I'm sure you miss your friends and some part of you wants to be back at school. Also, what is the how are you taking care of yourself now? I mean, you're virtual, you're on Zoom a lot during the day. What do you do? What were you doing over the summer, and also what are you doing now to make sure that you're coping in positive ways and you're taking care of yourself?
Well, over the summer, I was supposed to do I was supposed to go to a camp. I was supposed to do an Emory camp over the summer, but that was canceled because of COVID. So instead, I was doing a bunch of online programs. With junior year, I was trying to get ahead, and I started doing virtual information sessions with colleges. And well, as this school year has started, to make sure that I'm good mentally, anytime I'm feeling overwhelmed, I try to just step away and probably listen to some of my favorite songs to relax, because music is very therapeutic for me and really helpful, especially during this time.
Yeah, and you told a good story as we were talking before. What's physically, do you have a special way that you cope and just sort of get some tactile feel during the school day?
Yeah. So my mom, she bought me a stress ball because she noticed sometimes I would get a little overwhelmed and a little anxious with being on screen this whole time, majority of the day. So yeah, she got me a stress ball, and sometimes I just give it a few squeezes to help me calm down and really just relax and just unstress.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What a, it's a great thing to just, be able to touch and have something during the day. Um, you know, you were a board member at Active Minds. You're involved. You're aware of your mental health and coping mechanisms that you employ. So as a student, what advice would you share with other young adults, with other teens, on how can they prioritize their mental health and cope with the school changes this year?
I think one major part is communication, to be honest, because I know I know before, like me personally, I'd be kind of scared to like talk to my parents about how I was feeling, but I think really opening up to your parents on how you're doing mentally is really important, especially during this time, and just keeping in touch with your friends through social media or any way, or like doing virtual Zooms together. I think that's really important, especially during this time when we can't really be together physically.
No doubt, no doubt. That's great. And one more question for you, Francis. So we're going to bring in our experts in just a minute. We want to give you an opportunity to ask them a question or pose a question that we'll then ask them after introductions.
Yeah. So my question for the professionals is, if mental health isn't really talked about or is kind of a taboo subject in your family, how are teens supposed to raise that question and talk about their mental health with their family?
It's an important question, and we will get to it in just a second. Francis, you did a fantastic job. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll bring you back on for Q&A in a little bit.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and introduce our panelists, Dr. Silberman, Dr. Kennedy. You can flip your videos back on. So Dr. Adam Silberman is a physician who specializes in working with children and adolescents. He is double board certified in general psychiatry and child and adolescent psychiatry, and he's been working with kids and families for over a decade. His experience ranges from outpatient practice to intensive treatment programs such as residential treatment. Dr. Silberman is currently the medical director for Hillside, a nonprofit organization specializing in mental health care for children and teens in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Ansley neighborhood in Midtown. He oversees the psychiatric care component for children at Hillside's continuum of care and provides guidance to the next generation of child and adolescent psychiatrists who are training at Emory University and Morehouse Schools of Medicine. Outside of clinical work, he is busy as a husband and father of 3 and soon to be 4 children. Thank you, Dr. Silberman, for being a resource to this group and for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Christina Kennedy is an educator with a PhD in educational psychology. She is a part-time professor of education at Georgia State University and serves as the education director at Hillside, where she oversees the education program for children and adolescents who are navigating their academic career while receiving treatment for their mental health. She has extensive experience in helping teachers and students navigate education through experiential in-person learning, as well as through virtual academic programs. She has also been a presenter at national conferences, including National Conference on Differentiated Instruction, and like many, she is a parent helping her 2 young daughters navigate their first semester of virtual learning. Thank you, Dr. Kennedy, for being here tonight.
Hi, everybody.
So I should mention that we fielded questions during registration. We have a lot of great questions from attendees, and we pulled those out. We'll be asking our panelists tonight. We will also have 10 minutes at the end of the panel where we will open the Q&A box and our experts will field questions then. So if you have them, the best time to post questions will be during that session, but we also encourage positive commentary during the panel as well. So Dr. Silberman, Dr. Kennedy, the question from Francis, it's a big starter question, but it's one that we talk about at Heads Up for Harry all the time with students. In a household where a conversation about mental health is not common or just not comfortable at first as many times as not, how can teens open up about their mental health to their parents and start that conversation?
Yeah, thank you. And Francis, I think you did a really good job. and sort of answered your question. I want to highlight what you said, which is you brought it up. There's something, we'll start out with a big term, an undifferentiated ego mass. And what that means is families, out of their awareness, believe that the people they love and they feel closest to can read their minds and know exactly how they feel and what they think. And if our family members are not responding to us in a way that we want, we assume that they're rejecting us. It's sort of how the unconscious mind works. And I think we carry a lot of assumptions. The Dalai Lama, who I'm very fond of, was once asked this question by actually a daughter of a psychologist. She asked, why is it that we have so much conflict with the people that we're closest to? And his answer was, it's because we have the greatest projections around the people we're closest to. We misperceive their intentions and their thoughts and feelings all the time. Sometimes being direct and clear with people and not assuming they know how we feel goes a long way. I know in working with kiddos and families in residential and our day programs and in outpatient, parents are often taken off guard that kiddos are struggling as profoundly as sometimes they are. There's something called a parent competency in the kind of work that we do, which is DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. A parent competency sort of means, I like to think of it like a duck on water. So you're floating along looking peaceful as can be, and underneath you're kicking as hard as you can to stay afloat. And I think parents maybe sometimes don't realize that their kiddos are struggling because we as people try to present our best face forward. That would be my first answer. My second answer would be sometimes what you want, you got to give away. And I'd imagine that, believe it or not, your parents might be appreciative if you checked in with them. It's a version of compassion to be curious about how somebody's doing and to have the wish to reduce their suffering, which is the definition of compassion. So check in with them. This is chaotic times for everybody. And I think you might set a tone where they'll ask you. So those would be my two answers to that really meaningful question, actually.
Thank you. And Dr. Kennedy.
Just piggybacking off of what Dr. Silberman said, I think that as a family, we generally have conversations at the end of the day. How was your day? If you were struggling during the day, ask your parents, how was your day today? And when they respond, say, I had a really rough day. I mean, it was rough for me. And get that conversation started because you're in it together, and that's opening, like Adam said, it's compassion. You're asking how they're feeling. If they're feeling stressed or not, they're going to ask you how your day was, and you can let them know, and that starts the conversation, and it's not too hard to do.
Thank you. That's a great point. And what we find is, there's the generation of young adults and teens seem to be, increasingly familiar and used to having this conversation about mental health. So it may be sometimes more than their parents, as Francis's question implicates. So, asking your parents and checking in with them, that's great advice and much appreciated. Thank you. So as you're, you mentioned this, this having this conversation in the home is it's helpful, and it's helpful to have this conversation between parents and young adults. But when outside of that conversation at home, I mean, what are some signs that conversation maybe has gone as far as it can in the home, and we need to start seeing a professional to have this conversation and continue it? Yeah,
I think the more I thought about Francis's question, I was thinking about it last night, and it made me sad in one sense, or maybe it felt unfortunate. I think kind of as a family and as a parents, I hope there are parents listening. It's our job to create an environment that's a soft place to land for our kiddos as much as we can. Sometimes we have to hold the line. And in our work, we talk about, we can always validate a feeling. We can always support somebody in what they're feeling, maybe not their choices, but how they feel about it. Parents in particular miss depression in their adolescence, usually because in our adolescence, depression looks a lot more like irritability. So when we're really irritable, we call it less emotional skin. So when things easily rub you the wrong way. that's actually the number one sign of depression in the adolescent population. It's not feeling sad. And it's not what we call anhedonia, or lack of joy, when you don't seem to enjoy things as much. It's actually feeling really irritable. And often that gets played out in isolating quite a bit, feeling withdrawn, spending more time in your room, and disconnected. So, this is a really important time in the world to pay attention, because we're getting increasingly disconnected. We're going to talk a little bit about, hopefully, about how we reconnect and why we reconnect. But when we are disconnected, that's when we're really in trouble. So parents, please notice irritability and isolating to our room and not like being around, speaking to friends, etc.
And Dr. Kennedy, we'll pose the next question to you. I mean, so irritability, as Dr. Silberman said, can be a sign that of depression. But social isolation is so common these days, both in school and work and in other places. I mean, how do we reduce that feeling of social isolation, or make it so it doesn't have an effect on our mental health and sort of take us down that path towards irritability, depression?
I think it's going to have an impact on everyone. It's having an impact on all of us right now, and we're all doing the best we can. I mean, but they need to have contact with their friends. Don't get mad at them if they are on Zoom or if they're on FaceTime, if they're doing whatever. They need to socialize with their friends. They absolutely need that. If you're okay with having kids over in your backyard, sitting on opposite sides of the yard, talking and laughing and getting together, or the front yard or whatever, do that. They need it. I mean, kids are struggling. Adults are struggling. We're all struggling. You need that social contact. If kids, I know most teachers that I've talked to and that I've seen are setting up just basic little 15-minute chat rooms within the sites online so that the kids could just be together and laugh and be goofy without having to worry about the academics. Let them do that and take some of the pressure off. I know that I found in my many years of education that when kids are struggling with mental health, the parents really want to focus then on the education piece because they feel like that's something that they can get control over, when they can't control the mental health piece. Let it go. I mean, just let it go. Right now, everyone is struggling and we're all doing the best that we can. Your child will catch up academically. It will be okay. Every child in the United States and in other areas, they're all struggling, and we're all going to have to catch up from what we've missed. And don't put so much pressure on your kids to be so academically engaged right now that they're shutting down, because their mental health is more important.
And going back to I think we got a question in the chat box that I think before we move away from irritability and social isolation, we should address this too, because it's the inverse of Francis's question. And thank you to the individual posed in the chat box. So teenagers are, by nature, somewhat irritable, or they get in arguments with parents, right? So as parents, how can we approach that conversation with our kids about, hey, I noticed you've been irritable lately, or something. How do we start that conversation about mental health and just checking in and making sure that they're okay, or making sure that that we're providing them the support that they need?
Yeah, I think it's important for us to be inherently curious and notice changes in our kids. Yes, many adolescents are irritable and oppositional at times. And it's when we see a change from someone's baseline that we really start to worry. I think the best way of going about it is to be as direct as you possibly can and to validate feelings. So what sometimes gets in the way, particularly in these conversations, are the shoulds. So we call that shoulding on people at Hillside. And whenever we have a should, we imply a judgment. The reason that kiddos avoid talking about this stuff is because they inherently feel like they're going to be judged. So the best that we can do possibly to lay a framework where they don't experience a judgment. There's no should in how you feel. you feel what you feel, and that's why you feel it. If you can support a kiddo in articulating how they feel without making a judgment, you're going to grease the wheels of change. What really slows progress down, even in therapy, are judgments that we make unconsciously about ourselves, or even that we think our therapist has of us. It's the same thing in families. We worry so much about what someone might think of what we're going to say that we don't talk about it. So as parents, any opportunity to lessen judgments around feelings is really powerful for kids.
And phrases that we can use to lessen judgments around feelings would look like?
We're really good at using shoulds. Like I noticed that you're not getting this done, right? There's a judgment unconsciously, whether we're aware of it or not. So it's more about open-ended questions at the beginning. How you doing? This is a lot for everybody. So whenever we also generalize a feeling, we allow people to talk about themselves. So when we say, listen, I'm struggling right now. This is a lot for me. I can't imagine what it's like for you. So compassion, the wish to reduce somebody else's suffering, which is what we're talking about, requires empathy. Empathy means really putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and being curious. So what is it like for my kiddo right now? That's going to get you in the right direction. So a lack of judgments and compassion mixed with empathy will get you there automatically.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Thank you. And this time that we're in with the pandemic and children, going back to school or doing so virtually, can add to, well, as you said, feeling compassion with them and understanding the situation that they're in and generalizing and feeling that situation that they're in is so important to just having these conversations. How else can we mitigate the negative effects of the pandemic and being at home all the time for our students? And how can we not just feel that compassion with them and for them, but also just encourage them physically or mentally or emotionally with words or with stress balls or whatever it might be, to help them while they're at home or at home part of the time or all the time on Zoom calls?
Yeah, to me, we have to be really creative right now. We're talking a little bit about resilience is what you're asking. And resilience is the idea that no matter how distressing things are, our kind of boat stays okay, no matter how high the waves are. Another word for that is equanimity in our language. And we know that resilience is directly connected to how fulfilling our connections are in the world. So if we have really rich relationships, if we feel connected to people, I see kids through Zoom all the time. It's really hard for me. For kiddos, it's not. It's very natural for them. Any way that we can support kids in having a social network is really creates a lot of resilience for them. Anything that we can do to support them in connecting with others and feeling that strong sense of network that they have. That's what keeps them moored in okayness, when they have people to fall back on. It's when we get disconnected that we really get into problems.
And as an educator, Dr. Kennedy, I'm sure you have a great perspective on this. How can we virtually help students create this social network that maybe they're not getting at school right now, to help them build that resiliency? Because as Dr. Silberman said, that social network is key to the resiliency that's found in young adults and in everybody, I suppose. But how can we recreate that social network virtually for our children?
So kind of going back a little bit, I think that it's really important for everyone to note that kids are having to be online all day. And it's extremely difficult. And there are so many issues that are going to pop up during the day. And I think kids and parents need to know it's okay if a link didn't work. It's okay if you couldn't get into a chat room. It's okay if your computer decided to restart right as you joined a meeting. Little things like that stress everybody out so much, and you feel like they're missing so much, and oh my gosh, the whole day is blown, and that's not true. The teachers are dealing with the exact same emotions that you're dealing with. They know that things are not going to work, and they're struggling on their end to reach out to everybody. And you just have to know at the end of the day, it's going to be okay. These little things are not a big deal. most of the teachers that I work with and that I've talked to, and actually I think some of my own children's teachers are on this Zoom call, so I will give them a shout out. They put them in little side rooms, you know, so that they can socialize and they can do small group activities and they can get to know each other and they can have a good time. It's very important for them to be able to socialize. It cannot be boom, 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 all day, work, 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 work. They have to have breaks. If you see your kid start to just be looking off into wherever, rubbing their temples, which I do literally all day long now, you know, just not focused, you know, they need a break. And even if the teacher has told them, you can't turn your camera off, you have to be online all day, 5 minutes, get them up in the middle of the room, let them do jumping jacks, let them do push-ups, let them walk around the front yard for a second, let them do some deep breathing. Our favorite thing at my house is we play a favorite song and we have a dance party for 3 minutes. I mean, just anything to just get you refocused and back in the game. Nobody wants to sit in front of a computer all day long. Nobody does. It's hard on the eyes, it's hard on the head, it's hard on the body. Don't be afraid to let your kids take a break just because they have such a tight schedule. The teachers understand. You have to let the kids know it's okay to do that. It's the only way we're getting through this. And we have to kind of lighten up. If you have a bad day and you miss some classes or you miss a significant amount of time, you can email the teachers and say, look, we had a bad day and couldn't do it anymore. We had to take a break. They get it. I promise they get it. So just understand that.
Yeah, thank you. And question for you, Dr. Silberman, and very related, the both for students who are virtual and in person, the school was already stressful before the pandemic, and now the goalposts seem to be constantly moving with test dates are getting moved and college applications are changing. You know, schools are acting differently. So the fabric of what we understand as normal is just constantly changing. And it was already a stressful environment. How can students and parents help one another, you know, help those students to cope with those moving goalposts and the stress and anxiety that come with them? You know, some theory and some actionable things that they could do. What would you suggest?
I would say first that from a theory perspective, when we try to control things that are not in our control, that's what actually creates anxiety disorders. So there's only so much that we really have control over in the world right now. And we get a little bit more reducible with that in DBT. The things that we can control really are our reactions to things or our experience of things and never the things themselves. We call it radical acceptance, that the world is the way it is, and how do we live in that world and radically accept it without trying to avoid, which is, you know, a quick path to misery. More practical advice that I like to talk about with kiddos is we need to focus on effort and not on outcome. So we can control our effort. A lot of times we can't control the outcome of things. Mm-hmm. So what actually creates a sense of self is focusing on the things that you have control over. So for instance, I'll ask kiddos or families, what's the number one reason you do your homework? And invariably they'll say, it's to learn the material. That is not the most important reason to do your homework. I might argue Dr. Kennedy. So I really believe the number one reason you do your homework, because I don't remember much from high school, Teapot Dome scandal, etc. It's in there somewhere. What I do remember is how to show up for life. So the way you build a sense of self is through mastery. So when we show up for life, when we turn our homework in, when we work through things that were difficult, that's how we build a sense of self. And that's how we build the sense that, okay, the world is a manageable place, and what I put my mind to, I can overcome. Mm-hmm. So why this is practically important is we need to break things up into smaller goals that we can have control over and mastery over. If you think about getting into college, I say this sometimes to kiddos. I went to school 15 years after high school. If you told me that I would have to go to school for 15 years after high school, I would say I'm not doing it. But I did go 15 times for 1 year. That's it. When you collect it all, it looks like a lot. And can you break it down into what feels manageable to you and focus on your effort?
Dr. Kennedy, would love your perspective on how students can continue to focus on that effort rather than the outcome. How can they do that in a day-to-day situation, like they're doing their homework, or they're studying for a test, or they're sitting on a Zoom call because there's a test 3 weeks down the road. How can they enjoy that effort rather than focusing on the outcome?
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of chat messages about that too. I think that what people have to understand is that you have to have a routine. There has to be a routine. The structure has to be there. I think a lot of people feel like we're still kind of in summer mode, and we're not. We're not in summer mode. School has begun. We are back in school full time. Kids need to be up, showered, teeth brushed, hair brushed, breakfast, and ready to sit in front of their computer. We have to make that structure for them. And kids are going to gripe, they're going to complain, they're going to say they don't like it. And kids need structure. They just need it. They need to know what's happening here, what's happening here, what's happening here. It takes away a lot of that anxiety for kids. It takes away the anxiety for you. You need to know what's happening. So my best point of advice would be to have that structure, have the schedule printed out, have it posted, know exactly what's going on, which class they're in, what link they're supposed to go to every hour. And yes, like I said, if they become overwhelmed, if there's frustration, if you see signs that they need a break, give them a break. But it's not an all-day break. And they don't get to get on TV and watch their favorite show. They don't get to get on their phone and get on Facebook. They get to take a mindfulness walk around the yard. They get to take some breathing exercises. They get to do some push-ups. They get to sing to their favorite song. You have to make sure there's structure there. And I'm not being accusatory. This is something I have a hard time with myself. I mean, my kids are 8 and 9, and they don't even want to put on clothes every day. And it's like a challenge to get them to actually get dressed, brush their hair, and brush their teeth to get ready. But the teachers have been very, very good at saying, don't come on my screen without being dressed. We're not doing PJs, we're not eating breakfast, we're ready to learn. And so I think parents have to understand that they have to implement a really good, solid routine and be ready to follow through with it and implement it, or you're going to struggle. You're just really going to struggle. I think that structure is key.
Certainly, thank you. And Dr. Silberman, question for you. What does structure, because we know you have great analogies, what does structure do for our brain and our brain function versus how does the brain function in trauma and in stressful situations? And there are a lot out there today. So what happens when you have those stressful situations, and how does that change when we put structure into our lives?
Yeah. So I say this to kiddos. Here's another analogy for you, I suppose. Humans will give up happiness for really only one thing, or well-being, and that's safety or control. If you can set up parameters that allow you to feel safe and that you have a sense of control in the world, you're going to do much better. The way we train and how we understand how the mind works in stress and trauma, you have frontal lobes that are responsible for planning and what we call executive function. So making things that you're doing work out well in the here and now. How do you focus on things? How do you disengage from one piece of information, move on to the next? How do you stay focused on what you're reading or working on? It actually turns out it's very hard in stressful environments to be able to be focused. So there's another part of your brain called your amygdala. Your amygdala has all of your fear responses. So you're walking through the jungle and you're looking around, you're hyper vigilant, waiting for a tiger to jump out. You're not going to be very good at math homework at that moment, it turns out. So all of the work that we do in the beginning of our training at Hillside is we have to train in mindfulness first, or being aware of what you're aware of. And that's housed in your frontal lobes. So what happens is when you're really in distress, your amygdala hijacks your frontal lobes and you can no longer plan and think. You're in react mode. The more aware you are of how you're feeling, the more you retain control in your frontal lobes and you interrupt this fear part of your brain from taking over and being in fight or flight mode. It's called amygdala hijack. So training in attention and mindfulness and ADHD is talked about a lot right now. It turns out that we can really train our minds in weeks even to be able to do this sort of thing so that we can retain our focus even in distressing situations.
And how can we help our children calm their amygdala and do the same for ourselves, right? To allow us to plan and to be good at math homework and do the things that we need to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, so we do another practice at Hillside. It's a version of what's called cognitively based compassion training. So what we do is we first notice our thoughts. You almost think about them like your mind is the sky and your thoughts are clouds. If you can start noticing your thoughts without getting entangled in them, getting lost in the cloud, and you can watch them float by, then you start to develop this meta-awareness. What happens is if we're not aware that we're getting flooded or feeling any distress, we're in deep trouble. If we can notice that we're starting to feel distress, there's lots of things we can do about it. Some really easy things that we can do. Dr. Kennedy was talking about taking a mindfulness walk. What that means is you walk around and you focus on a sense. So everything I'm seeing or hearing or smelling, it's very hard to be anywhere but the here and now when you're doing that sort of sensory walk. And all anxiety and distress goes in the there and then. It's never in the here and now. Another thing that we can do is called paced breathing. So you really think about and notice your breath going in and out, and you try to keep your focus on your breath. And when your focus wanders, you bring it back without judgment. And that's how you start training in this in the beginning. And that's actually one of the most effective things you can do if you're noticing you're getting distressed.
That's fantastic. Thank you for the advice for all of us and for our children. I know that we have some educators on the Zoom call also. So I'll ask sort of on behalf of them and for them, but really for everybody, how do we project that calmness or that ability to sort of give people space to use their frontal lobes as opposed to being reactive. And I'll put it more simply, how do we support our educators, our young adults, our parents to help them calm and help them feel secure, as you said. Dr. Kennedy, I'll turn it to you, especially for the educators portion. How do we as parents support those educators?
It's very high stress right now for everybody. Parents are expecting educators to just make miracles, and educators are expecting parents to make miracles, and there aren't any miracles happening right now, and that's just not going to happen. And you just have to understand that both sides are busting their butts to make things work. I mean, they really are. Educators are trying so hard to reach kids virtually and to have all the content they need uploaded and to be able to answer all the questions. They're fielding parent emails all day long on top of teaching all day. And parents are at home and glitches are happening and they can't access sites and they can't get this worksheet or they can't get to this website. And there's so much frustration between the two, with the kids stuck in the middle, obviously. And I think that the best thing we could do, as Dr. Silberman has referenced, is just keep that compassion-based focus. Like, just know we're all trying as hard as we can, and let it go. If you just cannot get something to work during the day, let it go. Send an email to that teacher and say, we tried 4 times to get on at this site. It just did not work. We couldn't get in. What else can we do? And that teacher is going to write back and say, I'm so sorry. I had 1 or 2 other people that had the same problem. Let's do this instead. I think that we all have to realize we're in such a crazy time right now. School is not school that we're used to. And at the end of the day, all this is being taken into consideration, and kids will get their grades, kids will do well, kids will learn. It may not be the learning and the amount of growth that we're used to seeing in a regular school year, because some kids just aren't going to do well academically online. It just is what it is, and we have no control over that. Absolutely none. So we just have to go through this knowing that everybody is doing the best that we can, and communicate with your teachers without judgment, and without blame, and same with the teachers on the parents end. Just open the lines of communication and reach out to each other and let them know what's working and what's not, because some kids are going to do great with this and some kids are not, and we'll have to find other alternatives. And I don't know a good teacher around that won't reach out and say, let me do something extra to help your child if they need it.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like we all need to give each other a break. I mean, you keep going back to this, this compassion-based mindset, both for ourselves and, for our children, for our parents, for our educators. Dr. Miller just made a comment in the chat, which is great. So for those educators out there who are on this panel, the app Headspace is currently offering educators a free subscription. So that's in the chat box, so check that out. That probably applies to you too as well.
Yeah.
So for when compassion isn't enough, what is a sign that the current mode of education isn't working? In other words, at what point do can we not sort of compassion our way into feeling more secure and doing better in school? But what are the signs when just like virtual education isn't working, or the hybrid education isn't working? I guess as probably from a parent standpoint and from a young adult standpoint, what are those signs, and then what do we do at that point? What would be your advice?
I think you just have to really gauge how frustrated your children are. If they're getting frustrated with the work, if they can't do the work, or they're not understanding the work, I mean, always your first point of contact is your child's teacher. Reach out and say they're not getting it. They can schedule extra sessions. They can schedule after school time to work one-on-one with kids. I mean, always start with your teacher. And if the teacher comes back and says, I'm doing everything and we're just not getting it, then there are lots of options available. I mean, right now, with the way things are going, there's so many educators that are doing extra tutorials, one-on-one support, everything under the sun. One of the unfortunate parts of this COVID business is that most schools aren't able to actually evaluate children for a learning disability, because all evaluations really take place one-on-one, and they're not able to have that capacity right now. So most evaluations for special education are on hold. So if you reach out to your teacher, get that ball rolling, get them involved. They can reach out to their schools and look at starting the SST process, get the extra help, at least get the ball rolling. That's the best way to go. And I know a lot of people can't afford to pay a tutor, or whatever. So it's best to start with your teacher and let them guide you through the resources that are available through the school system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. That's a great point. I think that we're going to we're going to open up the Q&A in just a second. Dr. Silberman, anything to add to Dr. Kennedy there? Regarding when how do you tell when something isn't working, and what can we do differently? Understanding, Dr. Kennedy brings a great educator standpoint, and I'd love to hear what you would have to say as well.
Yeah, as a child psychiatrist, part of our role is advocating for kids who are not getting what they need. Parents, it's so important to educate yourself on what legally is your right. I can't tell you how frustrating it is for parents to find out later what a 504 is or an IEP is when they've been banging their head against a wall for God knows how long. So you really want to figure out how to advocate for your kids as much as when to advocate for your kids. So learn the laws. There are local laws, there are federal laws that that children are entitled to certain services when things are not going well. The more knowledge you have in that area, the more power you have. It's a really important lesson as a parent in America.
Very good points, yes. And most parents don't understand their rights, and that makes it very difficult.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, we're going to go ahead and get to some questions that are coming in the Q&A box. Francis, if you're still there, well, I know you're there. Francis, why don't you pop back on video? Welcome back. So Dr. Silberman and Dr. Kennedy, one of the questions that, the first questions and one that's been upvoted, our son, from Pamela, our son is very athletic yet afraid to catch COVID. My parents are older, but they're in good health. How do as parents we ease our children's fears about catching COVID and transmitting it? From a psychological, I guess it's a burden standpoint, right?
Yeah, this is coming up a lot with a lot of different families and a lot of different kids, and there's never a right size fits all for any family and what to do. We were talking about compassion, and compassion is born out of, if you're looking at it from the position of Tibetan Buddhism, which is sort of the home of compassion in many ways, that if we realize that we're all more similar than we are different, we all are trying to do our best, and we all suffer in our own ways, we're naturally compassionate, and we naturally make sort of right decisions in how to care for each other and care for ourselves. To me, I think you have to make these decisions as a family and be really clear and concrete about what you've decided to do and why. I think the more ambiguity that you have, the more burden you're going to feel as a kiddo. So if you come together and you talk about, this is the decision we've made, these are the reasons why, we can go out armed with that. And then we're back to control what you can control. So if you really want to go out and be athletic, great. If you want to wear a mask when you're doing it, and that's what you've decided is your middle path, cool. I really think if you do this as not as individuals making decisions, but as a group unit, it really is armor for a lot of the indecision that comes with these really impossible decisions we all have to make. Yeah.
We have some more questions here. One that's getting upvoted a lot, we'll get to in just a second, about sleep. We want to invite people also, feel free to ask Francis a question, because you have an opportunity to get an unfiltered answer from a child that is not yours. Here's a question about sleep. What are your thoughts of sleep on mental health? Teens they're staying up later to hang out online, but parents have fears that maybe this is a detriment to their emotional wellness and their mental health. But at the same time, it's hard to take the phone away from our children. So, what sort of advice do you have? First of all, what's your perspective on sleep and its effect on mental health and emotional wellness? And then what can we do to help encourage our children to want to sleep or get off the phone?
Yeah, so sleep has a way bigger influence on our mental health than we appreciate. Not getting a good amount of sleep can lead to depression, anxiety disorders. It even changes you metabolically. You gain weight. You have insulin resistant issues. There's a whole host of reasons that you have to get sleep. And I think it's something that parents really need to set limits around, clear, concrete, predictable limits. I'm really in favor if you put a kid in a position to earn or fail to earn, as opposed to taking something away from them. We get into power struggles with kids when we don't allow them to be self-reliant. So have you done X, Y, and Z and earned time up to this point, or have you failed to earn? Then it's an intrapsychic, we call it. So they're battling with themselves. Did I do this or not? They're not battling with you. Don't take away my phone. It gets impossible at that point. So I think this is a really important topic that gets way under discussed, because I can't tell you how many kiddos that we have that'll come in with some real mood issues. and they're on their phone with the wrong kind of light on their phone, and they can't sleep, and then they're ruminating, and then they're anxious, and then it leads to substance abuse, all sorts of things. So yes, I would definitely set limits around that. That's hugely important.
Dr. Kennedy, since it's such an important topic and we get a lot of upvotes on this question, anything to add?
No, I mean, he said it all. Routines, routines, routines. We are not on summer break. We are back in school. Kids need sleep. We need sleep. If I don't get a good night's sleep, I am grumpy, I'm hateful, and I am not fun to work with.
It's accurate. No, I didn't say
that. No comments, Dr. Silberman. But we're the same way across I mean, it's the same for kids as it is for adults. They need to go to sleep at the same time every night and take the technology away. They don't need a phone in their bedroom. They don't need a computer in their bedroom at night. And maybe older kids are, more responsible, but I know with my 8 and 9-year-olds, no technology in the room at night.
Yeah. I also think that parents get in the position of feeling like, well, maybe they'll think that I don't trust them. Put them in a position to earn your trust. I think that's really powerful around this, because a lot of power battles happen with technology right now because it feels like you're taking away a social network. I think if you're proactive and think ahead, there's ways of managing it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's great points, and such an important topic. I'm almost surprised it took this long to get to it. Francis, question for you. The uncertainty of these times, as a high school junior, how do you see this impacting you and your peers?
Well, obviously, since these times are like really uncertain, we don't know like when we're gonna have to. Some people might have to go fully virtual, which will be an adjustment for them. And then like not being able to see your friends, like you don't know when you're gonna be able to see them next. That's also like, I feel like that's a worry for some people. And then like, I feel like with these uncertain times, it's just like hard for especially the seniors, like the rising seniors with college and college admissions. So I think that's just gonna be an adjustment for everybody.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how do you see, just thinking about Dr. Silberman and Dr. Kennedy's comments about compassion and making people feel secure, helps them deal with these times. How do you see, or how do you wish you see or saw the school or parents supporting you in these times to make you feel secure, to make you feel like you're sharing in that compassion? Any thoughts?
Well, I know like like my parents, they like to ask me like how my day is, and like before like I would just like give like one word answers, but I think especially for like parents, just like really listen to your kids, and if they are like unwilling to give like a real answer, like really probe, I guess, or pull them aside maybe if they have like siblings, because I feel like me personally, I'm more open with talking with my parents if it's just like one-on-one, like, so I think just either talk to them one-on-one or just like really probe them if they're kind of unwilling to talk.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a great answer. And Dr. Silberman or Dr. Kennedy, this is a related question to what Francis was just mentioning about, opening up on both ends and listening on both ends. A lot of young adults, appear to be happy all the time. It's like you were talking about the duck whose feet are kicking underwater, Dr. Silberman. So how do we know when kids are feeling down, especially for those who appear to be happy or appear to be happy most or all the time?
Yeah. I love the answer about probing. Kids have gotten really good, I've noticed increasingly, at saying something and nothing at the same time. And so it's kind of our job to like try to find your way into their world. So any way that you can do that is just really powerful, so that what seems like a superficial answer will kind of, make you more curious. Like, well, but what does that mean? How are you doing? Fine. Oh, in what way? What allowed you to feel fine today? Any ways in which you're not feeling fine? You'd be surprised how many different ways that you can get underneath fine, and then find out that There were 3 different fights at school about 3 different friend groups. So I love the probing and be curious. Man, they're good at being superficial sometimes. And it's disarming because we're fooled into thinking everything really is okay. And the more you get in the habit of asking in that way, the less jarring it feels as well.
I'll tag on to that with a lot of parents will say, hey, how was your day? And just like Dr. Silberman said, they'll say, oh, it's fine. Think of creative ways to ask, what was the best part of your day? What did you like about today? What part of the day made you sad? What part of the day made you anxious? I mean, use real questions, not generic questions. They need to be very specific questions so that you're gauging how your child feels. So, I mean, just asking how your day was, I do that all the time. You know, my husband asked me how my day was. I'm like, oh, it's fine. I mean, same answer every day, and I do not have the same day every day. So be very specific about your questions.
Yeah, I think we need as parents and adults to have the mental space to do that. And I think sometimes it feels like a burden to have to be there when we have so many things going on. If we can set aside time in our head to know that we really do want to connect, it's really way more meaningful. Kiddos feel when you're authentic with them and when you're actually genuinely interested versus kind of going through the motions. That's a really big part of doing good work in what we do is how do you genuinely care about somebody and communicate that?
Great points. So we'll go ahead and ask one more question. For those that we don't get to, we will send an email after this panel. You can reach out to Hillside for some feedback on these questions if you'd like to continue the conversation, and there will be some resources in there as well. So the last question, Dr. Silberman and Dr. Kennedy, I know it came up early in the conversation. There's a stigma around seeing a therapist. You know, the stigma might be removing from talking about mental health, but there's still one around seeing a therapist. So as a parent, how can we encourage our young adults, our teens, to be open to seeing a therapist, and then maybe even start to be comfortable with, hey, I'm seeing a therapist.
Yeah. So I'm from New York, not originally, but most recently, and I'll say, where I come from, if you're not seeing a therapist, people wonder what's wrong with you, which is actually very true. The best way to go about getting somebody curious about their experience is we find what's called something that's ego dystonic. So there's ego syntonic and ego dystonic. There are things about you that you like, and there are things about you that you wish were different. If you can find the things, the ways in which your kiddo is struggling and wish their life to be different, that's usually the way into their world. So what about what's going on in your life that maybe the parent is questioning or worried about that you wish were different? Wouldn't it be nice for this to be different? So the door into accepting help oftentimes is, what do you wish were different about your life? That's how to frame that question.
Dr. Kennedy, anything to add?
No, I think Dr. Silberman's pretty much summed it up. I just think that, my final comment would be, everybody needs to give themselves a break. You just need to give yourself a break.
And each other, right?
Right. We're all doing the best we can. And if any of you guys are like me and you're on social media and you're part of neighborhood groups and this group and that group, and you see everybody just going crazy and attacking each other for no reason, you just give yourself a break and give everybody else a break. You're going through your own struggles. It's hard for you. It's hard for your children. It's also hard for your neighbor. It's also hard for their children. And we're all experiencing it in different ways. And, just take a big deep breath, let it go, and just know that we're going to get through this, and we should be doing it together as opposed to individually.
Yeah. Dr. Silberman, closing comment?
No, this was fun. Francis, thank you. That was cool to hear from you too, actually.
Yeah.
So thanks for having us.
Yes, of course. Well, Francis, Dr. Silberman, Dr. Kennedy, thank you all for your time. You were all great. There were so many comments as to people that found this conversation helpful. So just thank you so much, and thank you for being a part of this panel. Thank you for being a resource, and thank you for sharing. Before closing, we'll mention this panel was recorded tonight, so there will be a link in the follow-up email. And after the panel tonight, all registrants will receive this follow-up email, and we're going to ask for your feedback. We really would like that feedback, so we can continue to do panels like this and continue to tailor them to what you want to hear. So again, thank you all. This was a fun conversation. Everyone found it wonderful. So just thank you for your insights, and we all wish you the best.
Thanks, everybody.
Sleep well.
You too.
On the schedule. Go to sleep right now.
There you go. Okay.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Francis. You were awesome. Thank you.
Bye.